All right, it's 2 o'clock. I think it's okay to go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Katie Monahan and I'm a communications strategist here at the Ohio Arts Council, and today's webinar is Catch the Vision, Making Art Accessible for Visitors Who Are Blind or Visually Impaired. Now, before I introduce today's presenters, there's just a few things I'd like to go over. First, everyone on today's call is in listen-only mode. This just helps to cut down on any feedback issues during the presentation. But if you do have a question, feel free to type it into the Q&A box in your control panel as we go along, and we'll incorporate your questions throughout the webinar, and there will be plenty of time at the end as well. If you have any audio issues or trouble connecting, we recommend refreshing your browser, and if that doesn't work, try logging off and then logging back in. And finally, today's webinar is being recorded, and we'll post the recording on the Ohio Arts Council YouTube channel early next week. So if you aren't able to catch the entire live session or you'd like to go back and listen again, you can find it there. So today we are lucky to have with us several team members from Clovernook Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired, which is located in Cincinnati. Clovernook is one of the largest producers of accessible materials in the world, and in 2016 they launched an Arts and Accessibility Initiative, which offers accessible materials at cost of production and at a far higher quality standard than many traditional museum providers. At the heart of Clovernook's philosophy is the inclusion of the end user in the development of all accessible materials. So now I'm going to hand things over to Samuel Fuchs, who serves as the manager of Clovernook's Braille Printing House. Sam, thank you and the team for joining us today. I'll let you introduce everyone and take it from here.
Well, thank you, Katie, for such a wonderful introduction. It's our pleasure to be presenting today's Ohio Arts Council webinar. I'm joined today by Saul Garza, who works in our Braille department. He's a tactile graphics expert. He sits on the board of the National Braille Association. I'm also here with David Grimes, who is our quality assurance coordinator in the Clovernook Braille Printing House. He's a former Braille Authority of North America board member. I'm also here with Joey Cook, who works at Clovernook's Library of Congress Distribution Center in Woodlawn, Ohio. And also contributors to today's presentation with Charlotte Fabe and Chris Mundy, who we want to recognize for their contributions. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And we are here to talk about how you can help improve accessibility in your spaces for visitors who are blind or visually impaired. But what you'll come to learn over the course of this webinar is that a lot of these practical methods can also enhance the experience for all of your visitors. So I'll go ahead and get started with just a little background at Clovernook. So Clovernook Center for the Blind is located in Cincinnati, Ohio. We have a satellite in Memphis, Tennessee, and a Library of Congress distribution center in Woodlawn, Ohio. We were opened in 1903 as a home for women who were blind and visually impaired. And the Braille Printing House opened in 1914, and we were the first Braille production facility to be operated by individuals who were blind and visually impaired. Among Clovernook's first projects was the printing of Braille Christmas cards for servicemen who lost their sight in World War I. We have a really interesting history here at Clovernook that actually goes back to the 1830s. Our oldest building here on our campus goes back to 1832. So I could present a whole webinar about Clovernook's history, but we're not here to do that. So I'm going to skip forward to the present day. Today, we produce about 20 million pages of Braille each year. We're the largest producer of Braille by volume in the United States. Our primary customer is the Library of Congress, the National Library Service Division. It's a federally funded program that provides free books and magazines in Braille to individuals who are blind and visually impaired. So we do the Braille versions of magazines like Rolling Stone, National Geographic, Martha Stewart, as well as about 100 to 150 book titles a year. We also produce a wide variety of additional Braille materials. We do all the Braille menus for McDonald's, game pieces, business cards, lots of various kind of ephemera. And in addition to these, we have recently been assisting nonprofits in developing countries helping them optimize their Braille production methods. And actually this summer, we just performed our first on-site training. I led a team to Kyrgyzstan to help a nonprofit there set up a Braille production operation. We're also heavily involved with the Braille Authority of North America, which is essentially the body here in the US that maintains and governs the Braille code here in the US. And we're currently working with the Library of Congress to author an advanced professional Braille certification course that hopefully will help improve standards for more kind of technical transcription work here in the US. Clovernook isn't just Braille. We have a number of different departments that offer additional services, such as recreation, support programs, low vision services, employment services. We have a full working ceramics studio with ceramics programming, youth camps, and a lot more. But today we're here to talk about our Arts and Accessibility Initiative. This started in the printing house in 2016, and essentially it's a fairly simple initiative. We offer high quality, accessible materials at affordable rates. It's cost of production, cost of materials. We offer free consultation on the development of accessible materials. We're a nonprofit, so this isn't profit driven. We don't make money on these projects. It comes out of our, it's mission driven. And at the heart of all of this is including the end user in the development of all materials. And what I mean by that is including the blind or visually impaired individual who would typically be using these materials in your museum in the actual production process. So I'm going to pass things over to David Grimes, who's going to talk a little bit about his experiences in public spaces and museums. David.
Thank you, Sam. I'm David Grimes, Quality Assurance Coordinator at Clovernook. As you can tell by this picture, parrots are always accessible. I love birds. I love parrots. This was at a place in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and we just thought it would be kind of a humorous picture to put in there. But back to the subject at hand, when you go to museums, most of the time, if you're blind or visually impaired, most everything in a museum is either behind glass or roped off, and there's not a lot of signage of any sort that is useful to a blind or visually impaired person. Some places may have audio, but primarily most of the time you have to go with somebody who is sighted, who can explain things to you and who can read signage to you. My wife is very good at it, but there may be times when I go somewhere and she might not be with me, and other people just might not be comfortable doing that, or they just might not have experience of that. So one of the things that you can use to enhance the experience for the blind and visually impaired person is Braille. And as you can see here, they have the Braille cell. It looks like the number 6 on a dice, 1, 2, 3 on the left, 4, 5, 6 on the right, and the Braille alphabet. It's a very easy thing to produce. It's really kind of a complicated system though, Braille is. You wouldn't think it's just A to Z, but there are rules that you have to follow. There are contractions. There are lots of new symbols since we went to the Unified English Braille Code in 2016. An example of the symbols would be like the accent symbol. Before, in the American edition, the Braille AEBE we had, it was you put a dot in front of a letter and that made the accent, but it didn't tell you what kind of an accent it was. So now there are symbols now in the UEB for the grave accent, the brave accent, the acute, every accent, the tilde, and there's also other symbols that we didn't have in Braille. Now they try to replicate it as much as possible to get it to match the print as closely as possible. And being that you can use Braille, there is something to help with this, Braille translating software. However, not all Braille translators are created equal, and they're not perfect. And this is where it's important to have the end user involved. And to talk more about Braille translation, I'm going to turn it back over to Sam.
Thank you, David. And when David said that Braille translation is easy, It's easy for us because we've been doing it for so long. It's actually very difficult to do if you don't have a lot of experience with Braille. So on the previous slide, you saw page 295, I believe, of the complete symbols listing. There are thousands and thousands of unique symbols. It's not a letter-for-letter code. There are hundreds of these different contractions, lots of pronunciation rules, suffix, prefix rules, and because of this complicated the complicated nature of the Braille code, there are no perfect translators. Putting text through a Braille translator, don't get me wrong, is always a step in the process. But if that's the final step you do, there are going to be mistakes, and there are likely going to be a lot of mistakes. It's like using Google Translate to try and cheat on your Spanish homework. You know, it's not going to come out with the right answers. So the federal and state entities in the US actually require that their Braille providers are certified. And that's a professional certification that requires a couple years of study, the passing of 19 sectional tests, and a final exam. But outside of this state-federal sphere, that's not really something that people really know about. Braille is not something that a lot of people know about outside of certain small spheres. So as a result of this, you get a lot of, I want to say, Braille amateurs or signage manufacturers who just put text through a translator and post it on their sign or create a menu. And the Braille, and David can testify to this, is often, incoherent. It doesn't follow the rules and guidelines that it actually needs to follow. So Braille is one of those things. We're going to have a few items in this presentation that you can replicate at your own facility, but Braille is one of those things that you really need to source from certified individuals. Otherwise, I'm not going to say you run the risk. You almost guarantee that the Braille you receive is not going to be 100% accurate. So here at Clovernook, everyone's certified, and every piece of Braille we produce is proofread twice by certified Braille reading individuals. So where can Braille be used in your exhibit? It can really be used anywhere that you have print. You could also use it, for instance, booklets. You can have booklets that exactly replicate the panels on the wall. You could have booklets with creative summaries of what, that describe the paintings on the wall. They're a really great resource to have, and it promotes an independent visit and an independent experience from someone who is blind or visually impaired. Signs are another one. You can have accessible signs that are print and Braille, so they're dual purpose. Invitations. Braille is definitely not something, however, that everyone who is blind and visually impaired can read. That's another misconception that some people have. There's a significant segment of the population, especially those who lose their sight later in life, that cannot read Braille. So it's important to know that distinction. Large print is another thing that is useful to have for those who are low vision. And Braille is really versatile, so you can really put it on anything. I mean, you have your traditional Braille on paper, you can put on cardstock, you can emboss it onto metal. You can actually, one of my favorites is you can put it on peel stickers that then you can peel off and stick on anything that you want. So it's a really versatile, accessible resource. So practical steps. Again, I said this earlier, but Braille is one of those things where you really need to find someone who knows what they're doing and that has a certified staff. So Clovernook is one such example. There are several other agencies here in the US, most of which are nonprofits. And here at Clovernook, at least, we are dedicated to providing this service to cultural institutions at cost of materials. So that's typically just the paper it's printed on. But Braille is really just one facet of accessibility. So I'm going to hand things over to Saul, who's going to talk a little bit about tactile graphics.
Sure.
Saul.
Thank you, Samuel. First of all, I am the tactile graphics specialist here, and I also specialize in textbook production. But I'm really happy to see that accessibility is reaching the arts now. It's really important. Also that something that's overlooked are images created as tactile graphics. So what are tactile graphics? A lot of you might be asking, and what these are they're images, and they're created as raised surfaces so that blind, visually impaired can read them by touch. Now, the purpose of these tactile graphics is to convey the relevant information that illustrations, figures, photographs convey for the learning of text. Now, for the most part, images, the tactile graphics are produced, there's usually a transformation process where if depth is not being studied, they're transformed into a two-dimensional version. However, for the arts and the tactile graphics that are included in this presentation are exact replicates of images that were actually brought to us by museums. Yes, Samuel.
Yeah, and I just want to add that tactile graphics are, again, there are lots of different forms that those come in, but I feel like a common mistake in creating a tactile graphic is to try to do an exact replica, which exact replicas can work, but a lot of the time they end up really cluttered, so that they're actually confusing to the end user of the product. So when you're doing something, and a few of these examples that follow are exact replicas, it's very important to have supplementary material in Braille, large print, that explains essentially what the image is and gives it some context. So I just wanted to get that in there.
Yes, definitely, yes. So as I mentioned, we've worked with museums in the past, and this was a great success. And the success was actually, I say it was a success because of our rapport with the museum staff. The conversational, the communication between both our staff and theirs really accommodates what the end user needs, for whatever venue. So for the most part, the images are sent to us by in the form of JPEGs, which are electronic, they're condensed files. They also send us PDFs, Adobe Illustrator, so on and so forth. Once that image is received by us and the communication is there, that image is then transformed into a tactile graphic. So what I've done is I've included 3 images for an example here. So I'd just like to start off by saying that the design of all these graphics, which I've included, was done by utilizing CorelDRAW X8. It's a vectorized program, and it's really cool for the preparation of the design end of these graphics. So moving on, this was from the Massillon Art Museum, part of the Moniker project. And what we have to our left is a mammoth skull with tusks. Now, this was actually painted onto a metal plate, 19-inch by 19-inch, uncoated steel plate, and it was done with white paint. So this was an exact replicate of railroad graffiti, rail car graffiti. And so they paid homage to these Moniker artists. And so they've included this within their exhibit, and we've replicated that to the right. The title of that image is Swampy. I forgot to mention that at first, but this is a swell touch paper version of tactile graphics. So that was created basically by taking the JPEG that was sent to us, and it was actually traced with CorelDRAW using black ink. Now, the black ink not only represents the image, the likeness of the image, but it also serves for the embossing or the raising of that surface in a tactile manner. Now, the reason this works and it raises is because swell touch paper contains microcapsules of alcohol embedded in its surface. Now, once that image is printed onto the swell paper, it is actually placed inside of a photos in a flash embosser. It's a fuser, and that actually has a combination. It uses a combination of light and heat. So once the light and heat detect the black ink, the microcapsules burst, and therefore you have your raised image. So that's how swell paper works. Yes, Samuel?
Yeah, this was a really cool project. I think there were close to 40 of these
There
in
were
total.
37 total, yes.
So these were two-dimensional up on the wall at the Massillon Museum, and essentially the blind visually impaired visitor now has a booklet that contains tactile recreations of each and every one of those two-dimensional images, as well as a Braille preface that describes the project and puts those images in context. It's a really neat project. Swell Touch is a really great, great resource, great product to use.
So moving on to our second example, to our left we have the Ohio Arts Council logo, and what that is, it's actually it's just it's a circle with inverted A's adorning the circumference of that circle. Now, in order to prepare the tactile graphic, which is featured on the right, we've actually used, this is a collage style method, and what that is it's a raised surface, and the actual embossing is done with the little utensils to the left of it, which are called pounce wheels. Those are commonly found in art supply stores, fabric stores, that kind of thing. And what it does, it actually, it's used in clothing stores because the inseam of pants are usually mapped out with those, and then they later go on and thread it, that kind of thing. So anyways, the image was actually printed onto the back of the page, and the embossing that has to be done on the reverse side so that you get the spurred image on the opposite side. So the circumference of the circle was done in that manner, flipped over, and then on the top side of the image, the inverted A's were drawn. Then I used just fabric string, and I actually just pasted it with Elmer's glue. As you can see, there's, it's kind of vague to see the circumference, but there's actual gaps right where the V crosses the circle on. Do you notice that? Those are white spaces to, to show that the texture is, it's not passing, so that you can see it's part of the circle. So, and that was that. So once the embossed image is complete, we then duplicate the actual tactile graphic, which goes to the customer. Now, this process, thermoform process, dates back to, the 1960s. It was relevant then. This was the only method for producing tactile graphics, or books for that matter. There were no computers, so books were actually transcribed, and this allowed people to mass produce the product. So as you can see, I've mapped out 4 different steps here. The image is placed in step 1, the slide. The second one, a plastic overlay goes right over it, clamped down. Third image shows the heated coils for about 10 seconds. Heated coil actually heats the image with the plastic on top, and that captures the contours and the texture of the actual graphic on the plastic form. And that's what slide 4 actually shows, the actual finished product there. That usually goes to the customer. This saves time because that particular graphic took about 45 minutes to complete. So to mass produce that, that take 45 minutes per graphic, but with the plastic, it actually automates the process. And the price of this plastic paper is maybe 3 to 5 cents a sheet versus the $1.65 for the Swell Touch paper. So that's a big, incentive to duplicate. Yes, Samuel.
I was going to mention that yes, that the cost of thermoform is very low. So if you're trying to create a tactile graphic to distribute more widely or as a takeaway, thermoform's definitely much more cost effective. Swell touch paper, I think, is about $1.75 a page. So that's a lot more expensive. That's probably better for more static pieces in your exhibit. What's really fun about the thermoform process is that you can really use different materials. Like Saul uses different types of sandpaper and textured fabric to replicate these textures when it's molded onto the plastic. Also, something that Saul does that's really unique is that he includes the end user in this whole production process. So any tactile graphic that Saul creates, whether it's thermoform or whether it's swell touch, whether it's any of the others you're about to see, he will actually get feedback constantly throughout this process from at least two, often three or more individuals who are Braille readers and tactile graphic readers, and see what's working and see what's not. And he ends up with a much stronger graphic because of that. And I think, David, you have a comment?
Yes, I've done some end-using tactile graphic checking for Saul, and he's really good at it. But the nice thing is that when you use the thermoform, you get the different textures. But if you use gritty sandpaper, you're not going to cut up your fingers.
That's
My
right.
wife always says, "Don't mess up your money makers." That's what she always says.
Right.
So I really enjoy helping him with his tactile graphics, even though he is the expert.
Well, thank you, David. I really appreciate their input, because what is beautiful to the eye isn't always beautiful to the touch. And one other thing I wanted to mention was during this thermoform process, it's not only a duplicator, it really brings out the blemishes within the master copy that your eyes overlook, such as beads of glue or something that's fell on the paper, while you were putting plastic on top. It can be a piece of lint or whatever. It's going to show up on David's end. When he reads that graphic, he's going to say, "Hey, what's this stuff?" So it's something that people really overlook. And with the use of technology nowadays, they don't, really produce, from scratch in a collage form. And it's really important. So moving on to example 3. And this is the actual F.E. Corwin Trader exhibit floor plan. And what this is here, this was actually prepared using Visio 2016 Standard Edition. And this was preparation for an exhibit here in-house. And we took the dimensions, measured everything, and from this process, we actually created a tactile version of this. So we please go to the next slide. So as you can see, there's just really quickly, there's 7 podiums within this room, and they're art exhibits. And if you look to the left here, the focal point of this podium is the proximity marker, which is the black tape, which actually encloses the podium, and also the carpet mat before the podium. The actual podium has a headset so that you can actually listen to audio as you're enjoying the art piece. So I replicated that on the tactile graphic version, and I've added, as I mentioned before, these are great examples of textures, which are the top texture is a carpet mat, and the next texture is the art podium. So basically, once the visitor approaches a piece of tape, the proximity marker, it's actually placed on flat tile floor, so it's easily detectable by a walking cane. And once they step on that carpet, they know they're about 10 to 12 inches from the podium. So that serves greatly, for navigating that room. And I've also added the exhibit labels, and that's basically it. The actual visitor can go inside. I've also added orientation labels. Everybody knows where the lobby is when they come in. That's where they're usually let in, or the break room. And once they enter this area, they will be able to navigate this exhibit and enjoy it rather than sit there and try to interpret what things are, So, yes, Samuel.
Well, thank you, Saul. And tactile maps are definitely a useful resource. It allows your visitors to navigate the space independently. They don't have to rely on anyone to get them around. I really think the proximity markers are a good idea, having those around interactive spaces. And I'm going to briefly touch on a couple different types of tactile graphics that you can use in your exhibits, because tactile graphics are really also an opportunity to think outside the box. So we've done tactile graphics in zinc. Here's one that Saul actually hand-tooled onto a zinc plate for the Massillon Museum's exhibition Blind Spot with the Braille text underneath. Charlotte Fabe did this ceramic bar relief, a series of them for a series of Effie Trader paintings. So it's really an opportunity to think creatively, and it's also important to remember that it doesn't just improve the experience for visitors who are blind or visually impaired. You can improve the experience for all of your visitors. Having these interactive elements, these touch-friendly interactive elements improve the experience for everyone involved. And that being said, another thing I just want to stress it again is when you're creating these, it's so important to include the end user in the process because you'll end up with a much stronger product. So we're going to move from tactile graphics to audio, and Joey Cook is here today to talk to us a little bit about his work on the initiative.
Yeah. Hello, thanks, Sam. So I work with Chris Mundy on audio projects, who isn't here today, but at the beginning of a project, we will get, we worked on the F.U. Corwin Trader exhibit that Saul was just talking about. And another project that we just finished working on together was a historic calendar for Clovernook. This is a page from the calendar. You have an original etching, an image of a woman at a Braille printing machine, and then a little quote. So first we'll kind of work together with someone also who is kind of blind or visually impaired, and we'll figure out a script to follow that makes sense with the image and everything. And then once we have the audio for the example of the calendar, we created these QR codes that can be scanned on the calendar. And I think we have a picture of the QR code there too. And so that would link to that. And and there's actually on the calendar a row of single Braille dots so that people can kind of use that to find the QR code and scan it with their phone and listen to the audio. So from the narrator's perspective, they're going to, get as familiar and comfortable as possible with the script so that it doesn't feel like a script. So, it's more conversational. It's really important to avoid coming across as condescending or anything like that. It's, you're really just, you want it to sound like you're, having a conversation with someone or, explaining something to somebody. So the audio would pass through a microphone, and we use a USB interface to kind of transfer the voice, that audio, into digital, into a WAV file into the computer. And once it's in the computer, I use a couple different pieces of software to kind of prepare the audio and edit it. The first thing that I'll do is use RX by Isotope. And this is an incredibly powerful piece of software. One of the tools I use, I have circled there on the right side of the screen. It's a deplosive tool. If you're just talking to somebody in a room, you don't necessarily notice a lot of the harsh sibilant sounds. But when a microphone is picking up a speaking voice, you'll get some really hard popping P's or hard, S's or T's, real unpleasant, distracting sounds. So I'll use this to kind of even those things out and clean it up. It's good at cleaning up background noise and that kind of thing. Then from there, I'll go into Reaper by Kakos. This is a really super affordable, great digital audio workstation that I have used for years and love it. So you'll see the very top row. That's the WAV file. That's Chris's voice. That's the narration. And then below that, there are different clips of sound effects that I either found or recorded myself with a field recorder to really immerse the the user in the image. And we did this for the art exhibit too. So you can see there are kind of a couple different methods of preparing audio for an image. This is a pretty basic, straight ahead kind of black and white way to go.
There's an image of a woman seated wearing a yellow dress and a yellow bonnet holding a doll.
It doesn't tell much at all. You say, okay.
Yeah, it's not too fun. If you're looking at art, it's like, it sucks. So there's
To be blunt.
yeah, if you don't mind. So there's just I think with a little more effort, there's a better way to go around it. That's kind of a literal description. If you go more interpretive with the sound effects, you can really help paint the picture for someone who can't see. And then also, like you were saying, Sam, if you can see, it's an added dimension to add value to it.
Podium 6 of 7. Shaker woman with doll. Oil on canvas, 16 inches by 20 inches. Tactile model provided. Shaker doll now on display at the Glendower Museum in Lebanon, Ohio. The Trader sisters visited Union Village Shaker Settlement in 1909 and 1911, located in Lebanon, Ohio. The Shakers gave the sisters 2 looms for Clovernook's future weave shop, as well as a doll for Georgia Trader. This same doll is pictured in Effie Trader's painting of a Shaker woman. The Shaker woman wears a mustard yellow bonnet with 2 long blue ribbons and a matching yellow dress. She holds the doll in her arms. The doll has bright blue eyes, cherubic cheeks, and wears a pink dress with a belt, cape, and matching pink bonnet. Possibly, is this the Shaker woman who originally gave Georgia the doll? What do you think?
So this is just describing the painting. It's a woman sitting in a high-backed wooden chair with a yellow bonnet and a matching yellow dress with 2 long blue ribbons. And she's holding a doll with cherubic cheeks, the audio says. Blonde hair, blue eyes, and the doll is wearing a pink dress. And you'll also, if you're able to, you'll be able to hear kind of birds chirping in the background. Cows mooing. I believe there's a rooster kind of, doing its thing. So general farm outdoor sounds.
It's a really, they did a really wonderful job on this project. It's a really atmospheric kind of ambient piece, and it really helps to place the listener into the painting. And so, yes, this does enhance the exhibit for all of your visitors, but also for people who are blind or visually impaired. It provides a much more powerful experience. And I don't know if, David, you want to speak to that a little bit?
I was going to say it. I'm wondering if we should play it again anyway.
Podium 6 of 7. Shaker woman with doll. Oil on canvas, 16 inches by 20 inches. Tactile model provided. Shaker doll now on display at the Glendower Museum in Lebanon, Ohio. The Trader sisters visited Union Village Shaker Settlement in 1909 and 1911, located in Lebanon, Ohio. The Shakers gave the sisters 2 looms for Clovernook's future weave shop, as well as a doll for Georgia Trader. This same doll is pictured in Effie Trader's painting of a Shaker woman. The Shaker woman wears a mustard yellow bonnet with 2 long blue ribbons and a matching yellow dress. She holds the doll in her arms. The doll has bright blue eyes, cherubic cheeks, and wears a pink dress with a belt, cape, and matching pink bonnet. Possibly, is this the Shaker woman who originally gave Georgia the doll? What do you think?
So all of these things can kind of tie together in a really interesting way. If I can get this to work. So here at Clovernook, we have a number of paintings in our archives, and we did a little show where we highlighted some of our different accessible kind of techniques, and we created these interactive podiums. So here you've got audio and tactile and braille all featured together. And it really, you can pick certain elements over another, but I would really encourage you to, and I know that some museums have already done this, but especially some of the larger institutions will have accessibility panels where you get community feedback on your exhibits and really try and figure out what's going to create the most optimal experience for all of our visitors, no matter their disability or lack of disability. So I would also encourage people to think about this before you open your exhibit. So I'm not going to go into it in depth, but I would encourage people to think about access as they're actually planning the exhibit themselves. I think it's a lot stronger when it's built in from the foundation rather than added at the end. So, I'm sure that many of you listening are somewhat familiar with universal design, but I think the general principles can really help you ensure that you create a successful exhibit for all of your visitors. So we included this as a resource. Definitely should be a point person for accessibility within your institution, but the entire organization needs to be on board for it to be successful. It's most successful when the entire team is committed, whether that's your exhibit designer and your development team and your executive staff and your board, making sure that everyone understands why it's important and how to approach it. And really one of the most crucial things, again, is talk to user experts. So here's where I get a little serious, and the Americans with Disabilities Act is not charity. So these things we're talking about here, that really, so they're civil rights issues. It comes down to human dignity and respect, and I really want people to think about that and realize that this isn't just an act of generosity or of charity. It's demanded by the ADA, and it's about respecting everyone regardless of their disability or lack of disability. David, you have a comment?
Yeah, I was going to say that if you go through the effort beforehand and make this accessible to everyone, you're likely to get more visitors to your museum, and you might even get more donations for exhibits like this, because when somebody finds out that, oh, this is accessible to blind or visually impaired people, word gets out quick.
It does, and I've heard that from museums that we've worked with, that there's been a significant uptick in the number of visitors coming solely because they've heard that their exhibits are accessible. So we've been working at this for a year or two, and we're really interested in the work, and we're here to help. We're always happy to field questions, or if you want to get something tested. We've done a couple site visits. We're a nonprofit. A lot of these services we'll offer free of charge. Others will just do a cost of the paper it's printed on. So we want to be a resource, and we want to help. We can also help connect your museum or institution to other providers. So if you're interested, we've got a phone number, 513-728-6243. Or my email address, sfuchs@clovernook.org. So it's been really fun talking about this with you guys. So if you have any questions, I'd love to hear them.
All right. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, absolutely feel free to type them into the Q&A box on your control panel there. I had a couple of people who popped in a little late and were wondering if there was going to be a recording available of the whole presentation because they wanted to catch up on the parts they missed, and the answer is yes. We're going to post the recording on our YouTube channel early next week, so you can absolutely find it there. One question for you is, for the thermoform, for the graphics and things like that, what kind of a turnaround time, you know, if somebody had an order for their exhibit, how far in advance would you guys need that order in order to fulfill it?
This is Saul. Now, are you specifying the actual production of the graphic along with the tactile reproduction, correct?
Correct.
I think we need,
Yeah, I'd say
about a month.
4 to 6 weeks is, you know, unless we want 1,000 paintings, and
Right.
you know, it depends on the number of graphics.
Well, yeah.
But 4 to 6 weeks is generally enough time for us to produce and get feedback and replicate if it's a reasonable number of copies. So it depends, but generally a month or two.
Yes.
It's fine.
This is Saul again, and yes, the quantity does play a big factor in it, because just to put it into perspective, 4 thermoform copies can be done in 1 minute. So it's not a really speedy process, but like 4 to 6 weeks can, you know,
For all the work that goes into it.
for all the work that goes into it. It's not a real fast process, but 4 to 6 weeks generally would be a turnaround.
Mm-hmm.
Great. And you guys talked a lot about, oh wait, here we have one more came in just now. Let's see. Someone said, do you use 3D printing as well for these, such as paintings? I imagine it would be more expensive.
3D printing, now that's something that's really interesting. We don't have well, we do have a 3D printer here, but we don't have a fully functioning kind of offshoot of our tactile graphics department that's 3D printing. I personally think that it's got a lot of potential. There are some really great agencies out there. There's one called C3D that's right here in Ohio that produces free 3D, let me say, free 3D models to individuals who are blind or visually impaired. That can be a really powerful tool. That being said, you know, it's sometimes when you're doing something that's really complicated, you need to make sure that there's context for the user. So they need to know what the model is of, or you need to simplify the design so that it's more accessible. But 3D printing is a great resource.
Someone else asks, have you assisted groups with outdoor festivals that include art and music, for example, in a downtown setting? Have you done any types of accessibility work for something like that?
We haven't done that for one-off events, no. But I'd be interested to learn more about it.
Yeah. Let's see. One other question was, do you ever involve, when you are making your replicas, do you ever involve the artist, the original artist, in any of that?
We haven't.
No, we typically, this is Saul, we typically, as I mentioned before, that line of communication with the museums, the person, the curator, or whoever is coordinating the venue usually has a gist of what is needed in the actual replica, what's to be included, and so on and so forth. That's why the back and forth communication is really important, so that the exact information is conveyed within, you know,
expectations.
The
are on the
expectations,
same level.
exactly. So I like to go back and forth until it's met, you know, until whatever is needed is met, because you know, writing and that kind of thing, a lot of times misinterpretation leads you to other places that I try to avoid. So
absolutely. All right. Well, is there anything else that you guys would like to add that you didn't have a chance to add? Anything else you'd like people to know about Clovernook or accessibility?
I would just like to add, I'd encourage you to get in touch. We want to be a resource for you guys, and we're always happy to just to chat. So,
The FE Trader exhibit is.
oh, also, if anyone wants to come see some of these things in action, we do have an exhibit here in Cincinnati at our facility that showcases some of these accessible techniques, our FE Trader exhibit. So if anyone's interested in coming and taking a look around, or just stopping in for a chat, our doors are always open.
Great. That sounds like it would be a great field trip for some. Well, I guess that's it for today. Thank you, Sam and Saul, David, Chris, Joey, and Charlotte, who helped contribute to this presentation. Thank you so much for taking the time to put everything together and share your expertise with us. And I just wanted to thank everyone for listening in, and we hope you'll join us for our next webinar on November 15th, when our very own Arts Learning Coordinator, Jared Small, will be talking about the Teach Arts Ohio program. And I guess that's it for us today. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. And thank you again, Clovernook team. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.